And ba 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 ba. What's going on, everybody? Hello again. It's Jay here on the Onocoffee channel. Thanks for tuning in, and thank you for joining us on another week of Morning Brew, where we're doing coffee Q&A. So any kind of questions you may have about coffee, feel free to drop them in the comments over here. And I keep on talking, and I forgot to hit the button fully. Sorry about that. Anyway, so if you have any questions, drop little comments over here. And if you're watching the replay, thank you very much. And questions, drop those down below. And so today we're talking about how to brew coffee and doing practical brewing tips, really simple ways of brewing coffee. And while last week we really focused on pour-over brewing with things like the V60 and ending up with the Daiso Home Cafe, today we're going to be talking more about immersion brewers. And actually this whole week we're going to be doing immersion brewing coffees. And we're going to start off today with the B House, the bonavita, right? This is the bonavita. And the bonavita is an immersion brewer that's a little bit different than, let's say, something like a French press. What these are brewers that, what's up, McCrusty? Good morning. How are you, man? Good to see you. And so these are conical type brewers that you can actually use them as a pour over if you really want to. You could put your filter in here and use that as a pour over. You see there's one orifice down here, real small, especially when you compare it to the V60, right? And it's got ribbing here to keep the filter off the edge of the sidewall so you can have better water flow through that. And on the bottom here, there's a valve. As you can see, it's a little bit dirty because this is actually the one that I use on a regular basis. And there's a little valve down here that you open and close. And the nice thing about the bonavita is that this one is made with ceramic, porcelain. And it's a really nice quality brewer. However, when it first came out about 10, 12 years or 13 years ago or so, we brought a bunch of these in at Spro, and like nobody bought them because you know what, they were $65. They're pretty expensive, but man, they really are solid brewers, and I've been using them ever since we first got them. Basically, I started using it after nobody bought them. I said, well, I better use at least one for myself. And so we had one on display and one that I would use, and this is the one that I would use, and it's been going strong. I don't drop it. So it's like any product, but especially porcelain. You drop it, it'll break. Like this B House brewer, this one cracked. It probably got dropped by one of our baristas. And so, they're not impervious to destruction, but I think they're really great. And the nice thing about the porcelain is that, if you decide that you want to heat it up a little bit, you can get some thermal stability as you're brewing your coffee. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Why do we like immersion brewing? So what is immersion brewing? Immersion brewing is basically you're taking your coffee and your water and you're combining them together inside a vessel or just in any kind of container or any vessel. And you're going to let your brew time happen through that way, meaning that you're going to put the coffee and water together and you're going to wait and let it steep and immerse together until you get your extraction that you're looking for. And a lot of coffees are done this way, Besides this style, there's also the clever. One of the oldest forms of brewing coffee is, the cowboy coffee, which is somewhat similar depending on how you approach it. But certainly French press is a way to go for that. And I think it gives you a lot more body, a lot more development, a lot more fullness as far as the flavor goes, because there's so much more contact time between the water and the coffee. Where in like a pour-over brewing, right? Though you've got the coffee in here and the water is just flowing through it. And so the water, the time that the water has in contact with the coffee is more fleeting, which means that, the brews are fine. The brews are just different, right? They're going to be different characteristics. Now, what makes something like this different than like a French press is that this, you'll actually use a paper filter, and the paper filter filters out the minor sediments as well as the essential oils that are coming out in a French press type of coffee. And wow, it is getting hot in here. So you just basically take your coffee, put the filter in, put the coffee, put the water, and then you just wait. It's super simple. And so people have always asked me, like, what's your favorite way to brew? And you know what? Honestly, this is pretty much it. Like, typically I'm making coffee for myself, or so let's say I'm here at the roaster and I'm making coffee for myself. I don't want to pay attention to the coffee. Honestly, I don't want to pay attention. Like, or if I'm waking up in the morning, yeah, it's beautiful to have this V60 and have whatever recipe where you're taking your pot and you're just like doing whatever. But honestly, I don't want to do that. If you come to our shops and we're making coffee for you, we are following our protocols for brewing beautiful coffee. But really, for myself, no, gosh, no. I'm either too tired or too busy to sit there and brew for 6 minutes, right? What I like to do with this is basically I take these type of brewers, put the filter in, put the coffee in, add the water, walk away. I set my timer. A few minutes later, it starts to beep. I come back, and then I start to flow the water through. And that's one of the things where you're going to, that makes it, that's a bit different than other types of brewing, is that here we always talk about the brew time, and the brew time is always relatively the same, about 3.5 to 4 minutes. In this case, we're looking to be in that same range. And what I mean by that is that we're going to steep the coffee with the water for 3 minutes. And then once 3 minutes comes up, we're going to place on top of a receiving vessel, open the valve, and then the liquid will flow through, and the filter will do its job to keep the coffee grounds and liquid coffee separate. And hopefully that water flow that happens, that fall, usually will happen between 35 to 45 seconds total. So we're finishing our brew time somewhere about 3:35, 3:45 before 4 minutes. And, it makes a great cup. Super simple, super easy way to go. And, yeah, that's pretty much it. So we're going to demonstrate that. Let me show you. Misa show you. For today's coffee, we're going to be brewing with a coffee from Coffee Culture in Bacolod, Philippines, from a grower by the name of Cherry Kabandai. And, Thomas and Bombi were kind enough to give this bag of coffee to me. And it's been a wonderful coffee drinking experience. So we're going to take this and we're going to get our brewing on. At 24 grams. Of course, as if you've been watching this show, 2 grams for every finished ounce. We're going to make 12 ounces. So therefore, we're going to use 24 grams of coffee. So as you can see here, actually, it probably doesn't. On my monitor, doesn't look so. In my face, it looks very, very much on the light side. It's a very lightly roasted coffee. Nice, warm, cinnamony kind of like notes, at least coming off. Fragrances coming off the whole bean coffee. Now, what is the flavor notes they're talking about? They're talking about berries, peely nuts, citrus, juicy, intensely sweet. And this is something that's interesting when you see descriptions like this. This coffee is, of course, roasted in the Philippines and sold in the Philippines. And here's something called peely nut, P-I-L-I nut. This is something that most people in the West have never heard of. And I only know about it and what it tastes like because, well, I'm Filipino, so I've had this many occasions. And peely nuts they're kind of elongated nuts, really kind of soft, crunchy nuts. They're not like hard crunchy like I would say peanuts, but more soft, crunchy, kind of moving more towards the cashew kind of crunchiness, right? And, they've got a real soft flavor, but it's kind of distinct. It's kind of like if we were saying to someone here and said, hey, describe what an orange tastes like. Well, it tastes like orange. Kind of the same. So it's a little bit interesting. And it's an interesting thing when you look at descriptives that are from other parts of the world like this. I'm used to a very Western world. And as we discuss flavors and identification of flavors in coffee with people from around the world, you'll come across things like something to me may taste like a jackfruit or a lychee, right? Or longan. those are very Asian tropical fruits, and maybe some in Latin America. But for the average Westerner, like European, American, they don't know those flavors because they probably haven't tasted it unless they're well traveled or are well eaten. So it's interesting as we talk with people in the judging circles, how do we get people to have similar, or at least when we share a vocabulary, how do we have people have similar conceptual understanding of what those flavors are? And I think one of the more difficult challenges that we really need as tasting judges or people that really want to taste things, we need to be tasting a wide variety of ingredients or fruits or foods, just so that we can develop that vocabulary on our palate. And so, if you're thinking about that and you want to get more into it, I would eat as much as you possibly can and think about what you're eating, right? That's something that a lot of people will, I hear a lot of people will comment when we're tasting coffee. They're like, well, I don't have a great palate, or I don't have, they make some kind of excuse. But the reality is that everybody has a great palate. Everybody can perceive the different flavors. What is the difference between someone who, like myself, who's a cupper, or any other cuppers out there, and the regular people, is that the cupper people, the judges, they're thinking about what they're tasting. Like, I encourage people to, like my staff, I've always told them, as you're going out to eat, think about what you're tasting. Right? Sure, you're eating a hot dog, but can you break that down into what it tastes like? How could you describe that to someone that hasn't tasted a hot dog before? There's kind of a beefiness to it, more of a saltiness, right? There's that industrial saltiness when you're eating the hot dogs. And sometimes if you get it right, there's a snap to the casing. Maybe incorporate, how does the bun taste with the mustard? Things like that. And those are ways that I think that we can think about tasting coffee and help you develop your own palate. But anyway, let's continue on. We're going to do because we're immersing the coffee and the water together, we're going to do fairly a coarse grind. Pretty much I set the R80 compact grinder to full coarseness. It's not a very coarse. I don't have the whole thing calibrated very coarse, so it's not too bad. All right, so we've got a relatively coarse coffee here. Although, it never looks that coarse when you're looking at it. Actually, it's probably not really coarse. Grinder settings tend to slip over time, so you kind of have to go back in, disengage the linkages, and readjust the settings so that it looks correct. All right, so because we're using this filter here, we're going to fold it over on the seams, open it up. And before we add the coffee, one of the things I want you to do is to think about is to... Rossi wants to know, is your grinder normally that loud? Well, I'm probably not as loud. I'm wearing a lavalier mic, and if I'm standing next to it, it's probably louder than it would be right about now if I'm standing farther away, right? So it all depends. So one thing with this particular one, because it has a manual release valve, you want to make sure that it's closed. That is super key. I've had a number of times when I wasn't paying attention, and I'm basically just putting it on the counter here, right? So if I sit here on the counter and I add the water, suddenly it's gushing everywhere. And I was like, oh, man. So you want to make sure the valve is closed. That's super important. Let's reheat our... We're going to bring this back up to a boil because we really want to get it nice and hot. Get that full extraction, right? So if you guys are having any kind of coffees this morning, let me know. I'm interested. Are you drinking any coffee this morning? Or what's your favorite brewing apparatus? Do you enjoy these immersion brewers? I'm curious to know. Otherwise, I'm just sitting here babbling. Blah, 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 blah. All right, so let's add our coffee. Got to tear out our scale again. My old Adam scale here is a little bit wonky. The zeroing doesn't really work too well, so I have to kind of reset it every time. So now you don't want it necessarily to be on a full boil. So I've got a kettle, and this kettle is an all steel enameled kettle, and it's, room temperature, about 70 some degrees or so. And what we're going to do is we're going to take the water, we're going to pour it in here first. And part of what that does is that, especially if I'm boiling the water at 212, it's already above 200 degrees. We want to bring that temperature down. And by putting that in a cooler vessel, that will help to bring it down. Maybe it doesn't bring it under 200 so much, but it helps to bring it down quite a bit, which will affect the way your brew turns out. All right, so there we are. And what we're going to do is we're going to add maybe about 80 grams to bloom the coffee. Start our timer. Oh, I should have counted down. Normally I do a countdown. Now here, about 80, 93. There we go. That's good. We're getting some nice, like, cinnamon, vanilla kind of aromas off of this wet pour first. Now we're going to wait about 30 seconds or so. I'm going to rotate this around so hopefully you can see that there's not as much, what do you call that, glare over the screen, so you can see the, well, that's not better. One day I'll get this place worked out. All right, a little bit longer, 41. We're just going to pour down to make sure that we knock down the cap and reincorporate that into the liquid. Man, there's some heavy vanilla, cinnamon type clove notes coming off. 337, we're going to bring to 350 grams. Oh, 353 will do. And now we're just going to wait. And that's what I love about this. Now I can just wait for the 3 minutes to pass. I can walk away, go sit down, go do something else. More importantly, if I'm at home and I'm making breakfast, I can now finish. I'll start this right before we start the plate, right? So if I'm making, I don't know, sausage, eggs, bacon, whatever, toast, pancakes, you can like work on that and then set this up. So I would set it up before I started, right? And just have the water boiling somewhere in the corner. And then as we're getting close to plating, then I'd hit it with the water and let it run. And then we're pushing the plates out. Then we open the valve on the, put the whole thing on the cup, open the valve and let it run. And then, see, that's what I like. If I'm having breakfast, if I'm making, especially if I'm making at home, and the nice thing about making breakfast is that you can have beautiful breakfast and beautiful coffee, right? If I go to IHOP and I love their pancakes, I can have great pancakes, but I don't have great coffee, right? And they kind of frown upon you bringing your own coffee, right? There's no place to go nearby that I can go and have good food for breakfast and great coffee. No place. This is the way to do it. And so I can now have coffee and nice food, but this kind of brewing allows me to, finish plating and not have to sit there, and then I can deliver everything to the table at once. Coffee is hot and fresh, food is hot and fresh, and then sit down and start to grind out whatever we're eating that day. All right, so we're coming up on it. Oh, Dan, how are you? Good to see you, man. Love my trusty clever dripper. Agreed, 100%. So as you can see here, 250 is on our timer. We're gonna be brewing this at 3 minutes. So I'm gonna take this. This is gonna be a receiving vessel. I'm just gonna move this over to the receiving vessel, and then now that we're past 3 minutes, I'm gonna open up the valve. And now it's just going to flow through. Let's see if I can do this without damaging myself. Here we are. So there it is. It's flowing through, and really simple. See, this is really what I love about these immersion brewers, is that they're super simple to work with, super easy. You don't have to give so much time and effort to make something that's going to be very tasty. Like, the key part of this is to have really nice coffee to work with. If you could get yourself really good quality coffee, your battle is halfway over, right? Like, there's almost not much left to do. You could just do something very simple like this, and you'll have a great cup of coffee. Now we look here at the bottom. You can kind of see better the coarseness of the grind, right? Like, you can see how there's the particulates. Let me get that out. The nice thing is easy to clean. I just take it, toss that in the trash, and then I'll rinse it in the sink with some of the hot water that's still from the kettle. nice thing about the hot water is that it will, kind of dry out. Did I not bring a glass? I did not bring a glass. I've got a glass over here. All right, so we've got this cherry kabandai. And as you can see, it's a nice looking. It's a lighter coffee. You can even see it in the brew profile. It's on the lighter side. I'm gonna pour some out. Are we gonna get those berries? Are we gonna get the pili nuts? I don't know. Let's find out. Like I said, there is a little bit of cinnamony. I think cinnamon would be too sharp. Canela is definitely there is a big difference between cinnamon and canela, which is the Mexican version. The canela from Mexico is actually softer than the other stuff. Oh, juicy, fruity berries. I don't necessarily get pili nuts, but definitely get a little bit of dryness on the finish. That could be the pili-ish. All right, excellent. That's good. That's good stuff. Now, something that you might want to think about, especially if you're drinking Philippine coffee, is to have Filipino type of breakfast. And for that, I went out and found myself, finally, some of this ensaimada. And ensaimada, if you're not familiar, is kind of like one of the staple Filipino treats. This one was kind of made in a pan of 9, so that's why it's kind of square. Normally, they come in big spirals, right? And so what it is, it's yeasted, sweetened dough. Hopefully it's soft. Like sometimes, it depends where you go, but sometimes you'll find places, and I think the crumb is a little bit on the drier side. I'm not a big fan of those. It's kind of like Mexican concha. When you have concha from Mexico that's on the drier side for the crumb, it's not as enjoyable as the ones that's really moist, right? Same goes for this. Actually, one of the best that I've ever found was a place called, it's back in Manila, and like you have to call them Cunanan. And they're a small bakery in Valle Verde Village in like the San Juan Ortigas area. So if you ever get out there, that's really good. There's so many there, a place called Mary Grace. Here in America, you probably heard of Goldilocks and maybe Red Ribbon. If you're in New Jersey, the East Coast, there's a place called Philippine Bread House. Those are all perfectly fine. But some of the best ones are the ones that have the really moist, soft, cushiony crumb. Oh, and so what's on this, right? So we've got the crumb, the breading, and then there is kind of not melted butter, but like softened butter that you rub on top, and then you cover that with some granulated sugar, and then you put the cheese, right? The cheese goes on top. So it's got this really beautiful, sweet, savory flavor with like nice chewy texture. Oh man, when this is really good, it's really effing good. Like it's like superb. Like I can't get enough. Like I've been thinking about ensaimada for like the last 3 weeks. And I've been trying to find a place. I went down to Rockville to this place called Gwenny's Pastry, and they only have ensaimada on very special days. So I was disappointed. And then, but it's hard to find, it's hard to find reliably. So I found some yesterday when we were out to lunch. And I've already had one yesterday. This is actually really quite good. But yeah, if you can find it, I think you'd really enjoy it. All right, so let's have a taste. And, we're using our Philippine ensaimada with our Philippine coffee. Oh. Oh, yeah. Okay, that's good. Now, I'm just eating this regular, right? Just room temperature, no changes. My brother, who is actually the more genius of the two of us, like I saw him yesterday. He's like in the microwave for like, I don't know, 6, 7, 8, 10 seconds, so that the crumb is warm and soft, and everything on top is kind of melting. Like the cheese is oozing over the side. The sugar is kind of starting to caramelize. The butter is all melted. I was like, oh man, now that's eating pleasure right there. I was like, huh. Yeah, so get a chance, try these ensaimadas with your coffee. It's fantastic. Mm. All right, time for me to sign off because now I'm going to go sit down and enjoy this coffee properly with my ensaimada. But thank you very much for tuning in. We'll be back tomorrow morning, 10 a.m. with the clever. I think we got the clever schedule, and then the French presses we're going to do on Wednesday, and then continuing on with our week of immersion brewing, we're going to do the Hario. I got the new Hario. Well, I have a new. It's not the new. I have a new Hario. Whatever. I can see it, but I can't read the box. Whatever the name of that immersion dripper is. So we'll try those out this week and see what goes on. If there's any difference, or if there's anything to know. If you have any questions, switch. Thank you, Dan. Thanks. I'm real bad at this kind of thing sometimes. All right, so thanks again for tuning in. Appreciate you spending a lot of time with me. Yeah, if you got a chance, go check out the main channel. Oh, well, this is the main channel. I don't know what I'm talking about. We got some videos coming out. And yeah. All right. Thanks for tuning in, and hope you have a great one. And see you tomorrow.